Okay, welcome back. We are back live and taking up H91. This morning, we are going to be hearing from, community service provider. We're going to be hearing from the department and continuing our work on understanding the current system and services that are provided in the temporary emergency shelter program. So I use your quotes. So welcome. Welcome, Brenda. Happy to see you here this afternoon or morning. It's still morning. You've been in here, so we don't need to do introductions. So the floor is yours. Committee members, we don't have anything in writing yet. In true Brenda Siegel fashion, we will get it after she's done testifying. So, but the floor is yours. Welcome to House Human Services.
Thank you. I'm consistent, is what I say. Good morning. For the record, I'm Brenda Siegel, the Executive Director of End Homelessness Vermont. I also sat on the General Assistance Emergency Housing Task Force as a representative from Vermont Center for Independent Living and voted yes on the majority of the recommendations put forth. Actually, I voted yes on all the recommendations put forth to this committee. I also want to name two other hats that I wear. I work with a national organization heading up policy on the overdose crisis and have been working across the state and country on this issue for many years now. Additionally, I have experienced multi-generational loss due to overdose. I also do consulting work on all things human services, most prominently housing, homelessness, family services, the overdose crisis, and disability rights. And in this work, I focus mostly on research, rules, policy, laws, and systems, as well as program recommendations. I mention this because related issues will come up today, and I want you to be aware of the multiple lenses that I bring to these issues. Vermont urgently needs a general assistance emergency shelter system to become a general assistance emergency housing program. A program that provides shelter to all Vermonters who are experiencing homelessness. I would agree with Ann Sossin that we should begin to think of it as a path to permanent housing, not shelter that is temporary, regardless of if permanent housing is found or not. Our fellow neighbors and community members do not need to be worthy in our judgment of being sheltered or safely have a place to lay their heads. That should be a basic dignity that we offer to any of our neighbors and any Vermonters. The shelter needs to be the best shelter, according to data, and we heard from Ann Sossin about this, is non-congregate. And congregate shelter can be chaotic. I just had a conversation with a shelter provider, a local shelter provider, who I hope you'll call in, Julie Bond from Good Samaritan Haven, who talked about the chaotic nature of congregate shelter for providers and how hard it is to deliver services in that setting. But non-congregate shelter is a superior setting to the hotel-motel program for most people. Some people do better in the hotel-motel program. Last year, I sat before your committee and I said that non-congregate shelter must be provided for as long as needed until a household can find permanent housing or appropriate placement. I said this then based on data, based on limited number of people who had become unsheltered for long periods of time in our work experience, and at a time that an urgent, complex need or disability did allow for a reasonable accommodation to keep someone sheltered. I now sit before you and say not only that based on data, evidence, and experience, but also the experience of watching the majority of our clients run out of their 80 days and become unsheltered this past fall. Seeing catastrophic outcomes, including severe declines in health and loss of life. I say this now after our staff and providers across the state have experienced the moral injury of having to carry out an inhumane policy of unsheltering. I say this now with the on-the-ground knowledge of just what happens when everyone becomes unsheltered. The only requirement for accessing emergency housing should be current or imminent lack of shelter or unsafe and unhealthy living situations. Emergency housing should be available in all regions of the state to allow people who become homeless to stay near their schools, medical providers, jobs, and support networks. The program should employ housing first principles to ensure that when a person or a household is not a good fit for a hotel or a shelter, they are supported with a new placement, not sent to the street. Most often that happens due to a disability, even though it may exhibit as behavior. Partnerships between the department and providers and advocates make this work smoothly. Those partnerships do not always happen in their most authentic form between the department and providers. I'm going to go into more detail about this later, but first I do want to tell you a little bit about End Homelessness Vermont, those of you that don't know. End Homelessness Vermont is a lived experience-led organization that works towards the goal of ending poverty and disability discrimination and homelessness in Vermont. We provide a data-driven safety net to the safety net that is trauma-informed and rooted in compassion, empathy, and housing first principles. We are effective in working closely with teams of providers, helping people remain sheltered when possible and have the support that they need, as well as addressing systemic barriers to accessing or remaining sheltered and ultimately becoming housed. We work closely with providers, economic services, Department for Children and Families, hotel owners, and most importantly, those experiencing homelessness. Our point of contact is generally at the moment of an emergency or in troubleshooting a complex case. Our primary clients are people living with disabilities, health conditions, or complex needs, or in a complex situation. We also work in an ongoing capacity with people with over 400 households who need additional support to their complex needs and help 158 in some way with renewing their vouchers. Some we actually do that for them, and some we just guide them through the process each month. That is due, when we do it for them, it's due to severity of their disability, health condition, or trauma. And I can process that and how it goes in a few minutes. And Homelessness Vermont has two departments, the Office of Housing Advocate and the Office of Research and Advocacy. The Office of Housing Advocate, this is our direct service arm of the work that we do at EHBT. Within the Office of Housing Advocate, we have 2.5 staff, including myself. We have 4 nurse volunteers that work with us on a limited support of clients. Due to the complexity of our clients' needs, we work closely with their care teams, which are providers all across the state, and we find this to be the best model. This can include providers, hospitals, family, and more. Hospitals that we have worked closely with have included University of Vermont Medical Center, Rutland Regional Medical Center, Central Vermont Medical Center. We have also had the opportunity to work with social workers at the Brattleboro Retreat and Washington County Mental Health, as well as Rutland Mental Health. We have partnerships with homelessness service providers across the state. We have had the opportunity to work extremely closely, however, with Good Samaritan Haven, Brock, Community Action, Southern Vermont Council on Aging, Capstone Community Action, Central Vermont Council on Aging, Groundworks Collaborative, and at times John Graham Shelter, Life Intervention Team, and so many others. We also take ongoing referrals from Valley Vista. We have also received referrals from police chiefs and departments, fire departments, medical professionals, and family members, as well as other service providers to support people with complex needs from across the state. Rarely, if ever, do we work with a client without connecting to their care team and taking a team approach to supporting that client. We are not upset. We will find sometimes this is the case, but we are not upset if somebody else can do the work, for parts of the work, and we do other pieces to support them. We think that that's the best approach. In our Office of Advocacy and Research, within that Office of Research, we are in the middle of what is a 3-phase data gathering project, and was originally a 3-phase actually, and will instead be a 4 or 5-phase, depending on what this body decides in terms of changes to the current program. We have completed phase 1 and 2. Phase 1 interviewed 76 individuals of June of 2023, who were scheduled to be exited from the hotels across 5 counties. In phase 2, we interviewed over 200 people across 9 towns in 5 counties from September of 2023 to February of 2024, with no overlapping interviews between the phases. Most of whom were sheltered in hotels, some were unsheltered, and at that time there was a thing called the cohort, so about 46% was cohort and about 47% was regular ESD voucher, as the rules go at that time. Phase 3 will begin in March. We were supposed to, and it will go through June of 2025. Our report was supposed to be out this fall. Unfortunately, due to the crisis, we did not have the capacity to finish that. Right now, it's almost completed, and we will be having it reviewed by a public health researcher, Ann Sossin, who you heard from recently, before we are able to release it. 'Cause we want to make sure it was done correctly and you're interpreting the data correctly. You've heard a little bit about what we do each day, and I just want to note, that we have started this as a hotline in 2021. While I was sleeping on the State House steps to demand that this program continued, and that's where this organization was born out of. Since June, we've taken over 2,000 calls on that hotline, and on our most unforgiving weeks, we'll have about 200 calls. In January alone, our team made over 646 outgoing calls. And our hotline received an additional 107 incoming calls. In addition to that, we supported, I believe, around 85 renewals. I want to just stop here for a second and let you know the difference between what happened in September in terms of our renewals, which we did renew each client at some point in September. And we had more clients whose renewals we were doing at that time because we have lost some since, and in December. In September, we made 85 renewals. We did 85 renewals for more clients than we have now. In December, we did 167 renewals because of the way that the process happened. And I personally do not see how that is not an administrative burden for the department. There is some of our clients we renewed up to 7 times due to different getting into the process, only being able to renew for a certain period of time, the way that they process self-pay and income, and also the hotel's desire to try people out for a certain period of time, which we respect, but usually that doesn't end in 7 renewals. But because of other systemic barriers, that's what happened. If that makes sense. Feel free to ask me about that at any time.
So can I ask just momentarily about that? So I think we heard from the department that they may issue something as little as 3 or 4 days, for a hotel. There might be some conversation between the hotel and the person seeking assistance and staff at the department. And so is what you're saying that even though the person may have already gone through all the sort of eligibility requirements and paperwork, that even after only a period of 3 or 4 days, that they would have to redo all of that?
You don't have to redo the whole application, but the renewal has to happen at that time. And so if they have an income from a job, if let's say the hotel decides we are only going to do 3 days to start, we respect that desire of the hotel. It's a good way to try it out without them ending up exited suddenly. However, after those 3 days, if they have income and their check doesn't come until their next paycheck doesn't come until 3 days later, rather than 2 weeks later or 28 days later, then they have to do it again in 3 days. And then in December, they delayed self-pay, saying that it was good for people, but it was not good for people. Because what it did was they delayed all the self-pay from the date of their paycheck or the first to their next paycheck. That meant people with very limited income, like someone on Social Security with $800 a month, their delayed self-pay, that means they had to somehow hold on to money from the first or the third when they received their check to the 15th or 17th, whenever their next renewal was. And so that created massive problems where providers were paying the self-pay days in order to address that. Because quite frankly, I've experienced this myself, when you're in poverty, you're not holding on to money that long. So that was one of the many things that went wrong. Also, for income contribution, which is one of the recommendations for the task force, they have you every pay stub renew. So every pay stub, even if someone works a 9-to-5 job, they have to call and renew at the date of their pay stub. And now with the prioritization categories, which I don't know if everyone in this, we did, that has been talked about here. So with the prioritization categories, they can't call till afternoon if they're under 50, no matter what their disability. And so that has left this incredible challenge where they only have from 12 to 4 to renew, which is clogging the phone lines. And also they can only do it on the day of, and anyone who's under 50 can only do it on the day of instead of 10 days prior, which is what it was in advance. Did that answer your question anymore? Okay. We also help people through fair hearings. We attend economic service office visits with them when we can. We don't have enough staff for that right now. We walk them through the ESD process. We provide a monthly newsletter to more than just our clients, to anyone who would like it, to kind of inform them of changes to the rules, remind them of things like renewal times and dates. We support them in gathering information or verification. There's quite a lot of verifications needed. We actually have been tracking this month how many times we have to verify something, so we'll know that by the end of the month. We connect them to providers. One of the first things we do after we get their voucher settled is we connect them to as many services and providers as we possibly can. And then we try to build that team and create team meetings during that time. We provide support, like I said, working on their voucher and ongoing support with recertification. This fall, we also handed out $8,000 in tents. Us and volunteers showed up on the ground. We did exit interviews, people as they were exited. And we and other providers across the state carried out the exits. And it was quite difficult because it was a challenge for our own moral compass to be the ones carrying that out. When somebody needs support through a fair hearing, I am the one that supports them through the fair hearing. If legal aid cannot take it on. So legal aid will frequently take it on, and we work together on that. But I support them through the fair hearing process, which is through the Human Services Board. That process can be very difficult if someone is unsheltered, which is why in the recommendations, we asked for people to be able to remain sheltered until their appeal is complete. We find that people's phones die quickly in the cold. Also, their phones get stolen or smashed or ruined or don't exist when they're outside. And they can go to an ESD office, but you can imagine that there is a bit of a conflict for somebody who's being denied a service and having to go to that department to use a phone to have their hearing, rather than to be supported through another system where they can be in privacy, where they're comfortable. So that is another thing that we do. Leading up to September 19th, which is the first date, I think you've heard a few times, that's the first date that people ran out of their 80 days. That was people who did not have income contributions. Shelby LeBaron, who you'll hear from tomorrow, who works for us and testified in front of this committee as someone who was still in this hotel, in a hotel program, and is not now, she is housed. And I reached out to every client to explain what was happening, talk them through the prioritization categories, and explain that while we don't believe that this is within the law, we want to make sure that they have information that they need because we cannot control that it is what is happening, which is very hard to explain. But it felt really important to us to be clear that we were not carrying it out without explaining that we were not sure that this was what was supposed to happen. We told everyone that we were willing to go to a fair hearing with them, but we weren't sure that we would be successful. And so that might be a distraction that they don't want to have, because we almost always, if someone is not going to succeed in a fair hearing, tell them that we don't think that that's the best idea, because we don't want them to go through a stressful process for no reason. And on September 19th, which was that first wave, we had $4,000 in tents, not 4,000 tents, and sleeping bags, and 3 left at the end of the day. As I was putting the tents and sleeping bags, I was crying. I was about to carry out a policy that, as I said, that I fundamentally disagreed with. One by one, people came in. I was stationed at the Cortina in Rutland. One by one, people came in, sometimes people who I had helped for years, to gather a tent, a sleeping bag, and a flashlight, and a bug net if they wanted. They would then ask us where they could camp. In Rutland, the town and city had decided that they couldn't, so we were handing them a tent and sleeping bag with nowhere that they were allowed to go. A single mom came in with her 3 children, 2 children with severe disabilities, 1 in autism, 2 with breathing machines. More than 1 person came in a wheelchair. A mom of a 2-year-old who this committee heard from last year came in and proceeded to live outside. And so many moms and children came in that day. Halfway through the day, 2 service providers and a hotel staff came in the room where I was and shut the door. They said to me, Brenda, you have to slow down. This was extremely hard on me and it was taking its toll in 1/2 a day. And I took a break at that point. The statistics from our exit interviews that day told us that 56 people interviewed, only 4 of them had somewhere to go. Both were temporary, and we know that 2 of those were extremely temporary and ultimately they ended up outside. 1 had found housing for we had found housing for in just the nick of time, and 1 remains with a family, an option that had failed in the past, but does seem to be working now. Just 2 days earlier, on September 17th, I had sent a list of several clients who with extreme disabilities and health conditions whom I thought sleeping outside would have a particular catastrophic outcome. I asked for reasonable accommodation to keep those people sheltered. Those reasonable accommodations were denied. The administration has taken the position that Act 113, the FY25 budget act, which created this change, did not allow for reasonable accommodations. That is, of course, not true. In my opinion, reasonable accommodations are not something that the state can take away. It is as it's governed by federal law. The administration can always make reasonable accommodations. In that list of people, 3 of those people have died outside. Not in that particular list, actually, we sent subsequent lists. So 3 of the people that we ultimately asked for reasonable accommodations for died outside. 2 of them, 1 had oxygen levels that dropped to 45 and I had to go through a fair hearing to get him sheltered into an accommodation that would work for him. And now we are having to go through another fair hearing because he has to switch hotels because the hotel was sold. And they're not giving a reasonable accommodation to that person yet again. 1 of them got an infection due to not having access from his oxygen and his insulin, and the infection spread throughout his blood. He ended up having open heart surgery and losing all of his teeth because the infection was in his mouth. Again, I had to ask for a reasonable accommodation to get him sheltered. That one was approved, but it was after that they stopped approving the reasonable accommodations in December. So there was 2 waves of not approving. I want to tell you a couple of success stories. They all involved a community provider paying for shelter, which is something we could not do for everyone. We have a client whose name is Darren Phillips. He's okay with me telling his story. He was also featured in a Globe article after he became unsheltered in hotel after hotel after hotel after hotel due to his physical disability. We couldn't get the care that he needed into the hotels, and we were trying as hard as we could. He ended up in a hospital. The hospital did discharge him to the street. He was outside for 2 days. He can only move his arms and barely, and he has like a slurred speech. He wouldn't eat while he was outside because there was no way for him to use a bathroom and no care for him to get. I stood there with him and we called every single hotel, myself and Good Sam, across the state over and over and over again for weeks, really, but in those 2 days. Finally, I found a hotel in Rutland that would retrofit a room for him. He went into that room and he was the most successful he's ever been. We were able to get Beata to come in 7 days a week. Eventually, it did take us 11 days to get care once he was there. He has a really strong team with Brock, Homeless Prevention, Southern Vermont Council on Aging, and Homelessness Vermont. We meet regularly. He was supposed to be exited on September 28th. I went to a community provider and asked them to please, Good Sam, and asked them to please support him staying in, as he originally came from Washington County. He did stay in the hotel. Because of that, we worked out a deal with the hotel owner that was less expensive than the $80 a night, because we were not going to be able to afford to do it any other way. And in that process, we were in the middle of applying for an appeal for his Section 8 voucher. We were able to get through that appeal because he remained sheltered. He was approved for that appeal. We found the landlord that was willing to retrofit an apartment. The apartment is being worked on right now and is being retrofitted. And this person, who a year ago, someone in the Department of for Children and Families asked me, is this person just going to be in a hotel forever? How does this story end? Because they were rejected from every nursing home. We had tried all that too. He was willing to go, not his preference, but he's willing, and couldn't find one that would take him. And
Bennington, including the.
Bennington didn't,
in Bennington.
that wasn't there yet at that time. But now he has the care he needs and the hotel and the apartment. So by the time that was coming up, we already knew that we had this option. And so now he will be housed as soon as this apartment is ready with a Section 8 voucher, provided that we keep getting federal funding. But they did pause and freeze their vouchers at Rutland Housing Authority, and they did make an exception for him, a reasonable accommodation for him, due to the fact that we have worked so hard to get him into housing, and that he has something right there. So that's one success story. We also had another client who's blind, who I told you about last year in this committee, who had been unsheltered unwarrantedly. We had to go through a fair hearing process to get her back into shelter. She was in labor on the day that she was supposed to be exited. She was exited. I again went to a community provider and asked them to cover. Actually, I'm not even going to take credit for that. Shelby went to a community provider and asked them to cover 5 of our clients who are about to give birth. You'll hear more about her story tomorrow, but it was very important to her. And we both talked to them together, and they covered her. And so she was able to remain sheltered. She had a previous child that there was termination of parental rights, and she was at severe risk of losing best child too. And even though she was doing everything she was supposed to, but because she was going to become unsheltered. She stayed there. Throughout this time, we applied for a family reunification voucher. We got through that process, and that voucher was issued just a few days ago. And so we will be able to find her housing, and right away, the Housing Authority reached out to us with a landlord that may be willing to work with her. So that's a success story. Shelby, you'll hear her story tomorrow, and Tamara Hodge, she was just a few days from her voucher, her 80 days running out. Shelby knew her. You have heard from her last year, and we kept looking at her name thinking that we were going to have to, that we had no option. And her and her 3 kids were going to be outside. Right before her 80 days ran out, she found housing. And so she is now also working for End Homelessness Vermont, and she is permanently housed, and she is, by the way, killing it. I want to say that. Doing all kinds of things that are amazing. You heard about our client who has oxygen. 1 second. We had to go through this fair hearing with a client whose oxygen was dipping to 65 and ultimately on the last day, 45. In the preliminary fair hearing, on the last day of the hearing, he didn't show up, and that was because he had passed out due to his oxygen. They ordered that the reasonable accommodation had to be met, and in fact, that the department had not even tried to meet the reasonable accommodation in the finding. Again, this client had just had to move hotels. And again, I'm waiting on a fair hearing to hopefully be able to do it. I am not willing to allow him to go in, to have his oxygen dip that way. And so our organization, which has extremely small amounts of funding, had been funding him and one other client whose reasonable accommodation has been denied when they both qualify for housing. And these are the only hotels that will meet their need in this district. One other, I told you that there are some of our clients that died. 7 of our clients died in a single week. One of them very much wanted her story told, and you've heard about her in the news. And so I just want to flag her story. Her name is Tammy. And she was also a community service provider at one point. I've originally met her that way. We worked with her a lot. She was a person who sat at home and knitted and did anything she could to help other people. And on the day before Thanksgiving, and they were not using substances, by the way, when they were in the hotels at all. And I spoke to her every single day leading up to her death, aside from the day she died, in the last week, because we were trying to find her a December 1st placement. And her and her husband were found dead in their tent on November 27th. And they would not have died if they were inside. They had severe health conditions. But again, neither of them were using any substances, but we know that one of the major symptoms of becoming unsheltered is eventually desperation and the use of substances. And I can tell you that in Tammy's case, unlike her husband, I knew her very well, and I couldn't even believe the report, so much so that I had a meeting with Commissioner Levine because I just didn't believe that it had happened. I needed more evidence. As I mentioned before, I was a member of the General Assistance Emergency Housing Task Force. I, along with Shelby LeBaron, Amy Johnson, and Chris Flores, who you heard from, submitted several recommendations to the task force. Some we did not have the time to discuss. And also, I want to just highlight some of the ones that, so I'm going to submit those as well here to this committee. And I also want to highlight the ones that I think are most important that this committee pay attention to going forward so that we do not have a repeat of this past fall. I do want to mention that a letter was submitted from DCF where they saying that they offered a fiscal analysis and that our members rejected it. I just want to clarify that there was no fiscal analysis offered. There was mention of budgetary constraints, but no fiscal analysis offered. All 7 of the members did make total recommendations. By December 19th, we knew all of the recommendations. We all had the same amount of time to review them before there was time to make public comment. The most important recommendations that I think that we need to follow that are part of this are the household eligibility, maximum days eligibility, application, notice, and appeals process. That's number 1. I would say that if that was the one thing, well, actually, there's 2 others in here that I would say, and annual reporting requirements as well. So the reason that I say this is because the household eligibility was far improved in the budget to the H91, which I know that you're moving from. But we also took quite a lot of discussion and testimony in the task force. That's not the right word, but in the task force that led to the eligibility changes that we did make, which were very, very minimal, and I think just addressed some systemic issues that were had. The application, notice, and appeals. We have asked over and over again to have notice of your benefit, and that has been denied. We think that that's really important. And the appeals process, there needs to be a process that keeps people sheltered. We also, that number 1 includes participant requirements and annual reporting requirements. I will flag that we talked about the Olmstead decision being reviewed to make sure that any of the requirements do work with the Olmstead decision. And I just want to ask that we make sure that happens. I know this committee has already talked about the Olmstead decision. Potential adjustments to the emergency housing policy during the cold weather months. I think that's really important. I think what we came up with was when the campgrounds close and open. That's a pretty good measure of when people in Vermont think it's okay to sleep outside. And so that was what we came up with. A process to enable participating households to place a percentage of their income. You'll see when I submit testimony that there'll be that we have a thought out process. We talked to several Section 8 caseworkers when we came up with it. We don't think there should be an income contribution, but what we do think is that because there isn't a regular shelter, but what we do think is that there should be a process by which people can choose to save and support in saving, and that there should be a match. That may or may not be possible, but we think that would incentivize saving. And then conduct challenges. What I want to say about that is that right now there's periods of ineligibility. That means that people have 30 days when they have to sleep outside if they've broken a rule or not shown up to a shelter. It's really important to understand that the majority, I briefly said this, but the majority of people who break a rule because of their disability. That doesn't always happen, but there is a legal process if somebody has a violent behavior or, but the majority of times. And in our organization, multiple people come to us, having been referred to us after having these challenges or being exited from multiple hotels for conduct challenges. And then we work with them to figure out the right placement for them, the hotel that would be the best suited for their disability, and to get them the right support team. And then we see that they are never exited again. Sometimes we have someone that it takes 2 or 3 placements to find the right spot, but ultimately we've been able to find the right spot for all of our clients. So I think using housing first principles, we're able to do that.
And I just want to check in on time for you and just.
I have no idea what time it is.
It's 11 o'clock.
Okay.
I'm just wanting to make sure you have an opportunity to finish what you have to say. And if we need to have you back, we'll have you back.
Thank you. I don't know if I'll get through because I won't get through the additional recommendations.
Well, the things that I guess I realize you're going to submit this in writing afterwards. So the things where you're already in agreement with things that have been put in the task force report.
Okay. Don't worry about that.
Right. You can just delineate that in your written report. Okay.
Okay.
We don't need to spend a lot of time.
Okay. Excellent. And tell me at what point you would want me to conclude for today.
I'm not exactly sure how much more you have. So that's why I'm doing a time check, because we do have other
I
witnesses.
just have a few recommendations that were not considered. Anything else is just me. Yeah.
That's why I'm sort of encouraging you to stick to your script.
Absolutely. Well, my script is a little,
I mean, if you want to focus in on the things that maybe
Yeah.
are not in the task force report, but are recommendations that End Homelessness Vermont has, that probably would be a good place to sort of wrap up.
Absolutely. So the disability recommendations that we submitted, we didn't really have time to fully think them through. And so we kind of pared it down to a single line in the task force report. I will submit the actual recommendations. There's 2 different parts of that recommendation. The first one was making sure that the department always not only has the authority to make a reasonable accommodation and making sure that's clear in law, but also encouraging that that any kind of day limits that are set, that there is an understanding that there are people who their risk is severe enough so that they must be considered for reasonable accommodation. The second part is we took a rule that we found out during that fair hearing that I talked about earlier. We took a rule that was already a DCF rule in their rules that was not being followed. And we think it's actually a really good method for finding hotel rooms for people who need a reasonable accommodation and there isn't one available to them in the current package of hotels. We think that rule should be put into statute so that it is the method for how that they meet those accommodations, because we are finding that rule is not being followed. And that will be included in my written testimony. Under reasonable accommodation for shelter access. The only thing we changed, I just want to say that we did change a couple of things. We just changed because it talked about day limits and other things. And so we just took that out because it didn't make sense in this setting. We also are going to support, you heard from Chris Lores, I have to give you people-centered district guidelines. It's not actually forcing people to stay, but it's giving them better opportunity to return to their community, home community if they want to. And there we put in some methods for how to do that. As well as a better provider support and funding for those supports. We also have a habitability standard. I disagree that the department can do nothing about that except withhold money. There could have been leases, and those leases could have had a standard in them with the department, with the hotels, and that would have given another measure of leverage for what the hotel is expected to provide and offer. And so I would recommend requiring that those leases be instead of just offering. And we also had a recommendation that if there's an open chins case for a family, even if the child has not been removed, that household should not be exited from an emergency shelter, because at that time, the child is now considered a custody of the state. And that means that the state is exiting the child to unsheltered homelessness. And it leans better towards DCF stated goal of keeping children with their parents or kinship caregivers when possible. Because there are people in the hotels for whom it's a kinship caregiver that is taking care of them. And then our own organization has a proposal for a permanent alternative housing voucher. That proposal is because we have had two opportunities with two landlords that still are just sitting there, who will retrofit apartments for our complex needs clients and will work with us for clients who have significant mental health challenges in both single room occupancies and apartments. There's both exist, but there is no Section 8 voucher for those clients. They're often clients that get evicted or have another issue where they no longer qualify, or they're just not at the top of the list. And so we would like there to be a alternative voucher proposal where if somebody does not meet those or is still on the waiting list, they're able to meet all the same requirements, reasonableness standards of price of rent, and support someone being able to get into that housing. Because it does seem to me like we're spending way more money sheltering them in the hotel when we could have, between these two landlords, sheltered 40 families with complex needs. So that felt like a really big missed opportunity, although the opportunity is still there, just putting it out there. And then the last thing is, no, I already said it. And then the last thing that I want to say is that we talk a lot about the safety of the hotels. This is just my closing argument. We talk a lot about the safety of hotels, and it's really important to understand that there is no one size fits all for any of this. And so for some people, those hotels are the only thing that's going to work for them for a variety of reasons around their disability. For many people, and I would say most, congregate shelter, meaning where everybody's in the same room, not where everybody has their own private space. We consider that non-congregate shelter, but where everybody's in the same room is actually very damaging. We have 96% of the people we interviewed had some kind of mental illness. That it's not just dangerous, it's chaotic, and it can be unsafe for the individual, and it can be unsafe for the providers. And so it's really, really important. The providers we work with are not afraid to go in hotels. I have no idea I feel like this is a narrative that sometimes people might comment on it, but we all go in hotels and we are not afraid to go there. I'm not afraid. I'm way more afraid of other things that I come across in the world than going into hotels. And the people that we work with in the hotels, and I want to be really clear about this, are the best humans I've ever met in my entire life, for the most part. They are incredible people who want to give to each other, who want to support each other, and who have built communities there. They are not isolated. Sometimes they don't want to leave because they've built such a strong community. And so the support that we can offer them in getting housed is that we make sure that they stay connected to the community that they've built with one another. And so we really want to make sure that clients have the assistance and the support that they need. And when you look at the math of of what just went on. We, you all know this is for $3.2 million, we have 17 families. It was $2.9 million more than it would have been to keep those 17 families sheltered in a hotel. It really worked for some families, but that's huge high cost. And who knows if those families would have had, I believe that those families would have had the exact same support if if the funding had been appropriate for providers to offer the services that they got in that family shelter. It wasn't because they moved to the family shelter. It's because the department decided to put significant resources into services in that family shelter, services that has not been funded appropriately through the legislature or the department in the community. The only thing that I will say is that we are spending too much time and energy fighting over and over again about this hotel program. And I know that providers are feeling really strongly that there needs to be a parallel action, that people need to remain sheltered permanently until they are housed, and we need to create shelter and permanent housing at the exact same time, which will show the natural decline of the hotel motel program. I don't want to have this fight every BAA or every budget any longer. I want to work on other things, and I know that every provider feels that way. And when our report is out, if you do want to hear specifics to the data, I'll send it in. I'm happy to be available, and I will, like I did last year, and again in true Brenda Siegel fashion, I will make a very organized version of this that you can see exactly what I was recommending through all of that. Thank you.
Thank you, Brenda. I appreciate that. I appreciate all the work you and your organization is doing, and recognize it's been a rough time. So just wanted to say thank you, and we look forward to getting your specific recommendations and seeing that in writing. I will say as soon as possible.
Yes.
All right.
Get it by next week. I will get it to you.
Okay.
Or maybe before.
Yeah. By Tuesday at the latest. Rep. Cole?
Just a quick point here, mostly point of gratitude. Like I mean, I don't know what we would do without the services that your organization has provided. I think the death count would be far higher, unfortunately, and it is far higher than the numbers that you reported, because those are your clients that you spoke with. You know, I have a friend who died this past year who was using a walker, and you know, we don't even know, but nobody knows. I don't know if that has been reported anywhere. Like, and that wasn't reported in your statistics because she wasn't connected with you. So it's just, I mean, this is dire. And so you giving a voice to the specific experiences of folks, even just a piece of the pie, hopefully can paint a better picture for how direct legislative action is going to affect this issue.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Brenda. Okay, next we're going to hear from Lily Sojourner. Kind of a changing of the guard here. Make room for others. Welcome, Lily. I think it's the first time we're seeing you in person this year.
Yes, I think I was on the sidelines one day. Yes.
Welcome, Miranda.
Is
So let me just give a little bit of background. So what I asked both Miranda and Lily to do is to fill in the background pieces of what currently exists. And Miranda's going to run through the most recent reporting of what's happening in the GA quote unquote program right now. And then or vice versa, that doesn't matter to me who goes first. And Lily's going to give us some background on existing shelter services and kind of an overview. I was rereading the HOP awards and the grants and the continuum of care and sort of all of that stuff that's all rolled up into that. That would be great. So. And I did want to just acknowledge that we've been joined by our friend from Appropriation. Happy to have you.
Thanks.
I know. Make that a permanent spot. We could have 12 people on this committee, it'd be all right. All righty, so the floor is yours. Whomever wants.
Thank you
to
so
start.
much. I think I'm going to start for the record. Lily Sojourner, Director of the Office of Economic Opportunity. Always the hardest part of the day, making sure I can share my presentation. Yes, and we should have that work? Yes, okay. No, not right there. Oh my gosh, what is that then? Now sharing. Oh, excellent.
There you go.
Did you open it so I can
Maybe.
see it on my computer? All right. All right. So again, thank you so much. I really appreciate the opportunity to discuss the Housing Opportunity Grant Program. We call it HOP. This is one of the many anti-poverty programs administered by our SOT, the Office of Economic Opportunity, which is within the Department for Children and Families. We work primarily through grants and contracts to support a network of community providers in this very important work. So today I'm really going to focus on emergency shelter, although happy to take other questions, but I did want to just highlight to start that, as the chair just alluded to, the Housing Opportunity Grant Program is a framework that is leveraged to support a number of services that are part of the emergency response system. Goal is really to keep homelessness brief, infrequent, and non-recurring. And as I think you've heard from many others, that is challenging in this space when we do lack the permanent housing options that we really need. But you can see again that a number of services beyond emergency housing, a lot of additional case management to help prevent people from becoming homelessness, as well as to help get people rapidly rehoused. We also support the coordinated entry system. We provide direct, flexible financial assistance to individuals to help maintain their housing or get rehoused. So this could be, for instance, security deposit assistance. And then we support the statewide homeless management information system. So that's a larger overview. And I will just again share my appreciation to the legislature for your ongoing support of Vermonters experiencing homelessness. You can see how this program has grown pretty dramatically over the past few years, and last year even grew to about $26 million. So again, just really appreciate the attention that folks have given this, and we really try to make investments in the community that will make a difference to Vermonters. And so shifting or focusing in really on HOP funded shelters. So, you know, again, emergency shelters, we're looking to meet folks' basic needs. I think, as you've heard from many others, while we don't want people experiencing homelessness in Vermont, we would much rather people be sheltered than unsheltered while they're experiencing homelessness. And it is very important for us that they have a safe place to go and have their needs met. Of the total umbrella of HOP funding, about 17.5 million was awarded to shelters. This is shelter operations and basic on-site services. It does not include like the large startup funds such as acquisition or major renovations. Typically, shelters have gone to Vermont Housing and Conservation Board for those funds. I will say, you know, conservative estimate is that the total cost of a shelter is $125 per night per household. So I just also want to highlight that we're not paying 100% of the cost for shelters, and they are leveraging other federal, state, municipal, and private funding to run their operations. Our current shelter capacity is just over 600 households. Now, a household could be a household of one or a household of a family. And what we've awarded and we expect, additional capacity to continue to come online is 697 households. I do have another one pager that I will share at the end just for the ease of Zoom sharing. We appreciate the request to try to see what is the layout statewide in a visual format. I will share that later, and I really welcome your feedback, as it's a lot of information to put on one map, and our team really tried. So again, welcome your feedback so we can help refine that for you as a tool.
Maybe another way to ask the question is, where do you see a lack of shelter capacity? Where are the places that we have gaps?
So I think, really and I can go to the next slide and give you a little bit more breakdown. So a majority of our shelters at this point operate year round. We only have 4 seasonal shelter projects this year. A majority are semi-congregate, and this came up a little bit with the last witness, but when we define these terms congregate, semi-congregate, and non-congregate, we really look at congregate as a location where people are in a common area with limited or no privacy. So you could think of like a big open space. Semi-congregate is the majority of our shelters in Vermont. So those are locations where households have their own private sleeping space, but are sharing common spaces such as bathrooms or kitchens. A majority of shelters in Vermont are like converted old farmhouses. So you can kind of get a sense of our old downtown kind of Victorian houses. So again, families or individuals have their own room that they can lock and they have privacy, but maybe they're sharing a bathroom with a few other folks. And then again, they have large kitchen areas where they can share access. Or sometimes if we have a few households sharing sleeping space with either a limited number of households, so maybe again, you have a private room, but 2 people, or significant partitions. And then non-congregate is really completely your own private space, private access to a bathroom, and either a private kitchen option, or again, you're sharing with minimal people. So again, a majority of ours in Vermont are semi-congregate and just 12% are congregate. 23% focus on those experiencing domestic violence. And then below you can see the household composition. So, a majority are either adults only or adults and families. And then we have some that are specifically for families with minor children, which we define as under 18, or also a subset do kind of young adults, the 18 to 24-year-old.
Yeah, go ahead.
I'm wondering if you have a breakdown of occupancy rates for each different type of shelter with different levels of congregate.
We do, and this ties in perfectly to our next slide. We do ongoing monitoring, and that does include quarterly reports from shelters, where one of the things we do look at is occupancy. And that is analysis that we could look at to see if we see any trends. Generally speaking, our shelter spaces are all utilized at this time. And so we're not seeing, one type go unutilized. But it is a way for us to kind of monitor, are there any spaces that for some reason are offline? For instance, are they needing repairs? Or sometimes the shelters or emergency apartments are managing a bug bed outbreak. But generally speaking, we're seeing high utilization across all types. And again, that is something we look at in the quarterly reports that we review. We also, so our small team, we have a set of standards and guidance that we expect all shelters to adhere to. We do annual habitability inspections to make sure the physical space meets those safety inspections. We do programmatic monitoring to review all their policies, as well as a sampling of client files. We do our quarterly and annual report as an opportunity to look at both the performance data as well as narratives. And then we do ongoing fiscal monitoring. So our team is able to provide that level of oversight. And let me see if I can stop sharing and then share the visual, and then again, happy to take additional questions, and very happy to get feedback on this slide. It is a busy slide. And this, I believe, was provided to you all and should be available on your website. So what we try to do is, so again, I just want to stress that these are HOP funded shelters. There are some shelters that operate in the state that do not receive funding from the department. And then this also does not include Waterbury and Williston, the two family run shelters, as those were not operated as HOP shelters. So you can see this key. We tried to, again, take into some of the questions that we were hearing from folks in terms of which are seasonal, which are year round, which composition, household composition, and then the numbers. So you can see, for instance, in Rutland, right now there's capacity, and this is current capacity, not awarded. There's 7 that are either adults or families with children, so that corresponds here, and then 16 that are domestic violence. So that's a way to look at this. There are a few, if I scroll up to St. Albans, for instance, you see a few that are 0. These are awarded projects that we are just waiting to come online. So for instance, we're able to expand a second building for Voices Against Violence, which is a domestic violence shelter in St. Albans, as well as a youth-focused shelter through Spectrum Family Services. And we're expecting one to come online later this week, and then Spectrum hopefully in March. You know, with any large kind of construction acquisition project, you do sometimes see delays. There can be community pushback, there's permitting processes. Sometimes the real estate transactions fall through. I think recently over the winter, we've heard that just finding contractors has been challenging to do the necessary safety renovations that you need to rehab one of these buildings. Often our providers are going after buildings that, you know, may not otherwise be sought out. And so they can have a lot of sort of rehab to do to bring them up to safety standards. In addition to those projects that are coming online in the near future, you know, our office is really in close collaboration with our community partners and our community leaders. And we are hoping for additional shelter options in Chittenden, Bennington Memorial, Wyndham Windsor. We're also working on a new approach at the agency to extreme cold weather and trying to kind of finalize that as well. So there continues to be efforts to grow. And again, really appreciate the ongoing investment and recognition by the legislature.
We have Rep Donahue, Rep Garofano, Rep East.
Thank you.
When I was looking at the map, thank you for answering the question about how there could be a shelter with 0 beds.
Yes, I would.
I do wonder if, as a reference map, there would be a way to indicate, you know, 0 dash, but how many beds
Okay, yeah.
is it projected to
I'm
have?
gonna borrow a pencil. Absolutely, we can make that.
If and when.
Yes, absolutely. And again, those are the ones that have 0, we did put on there because we expect them open between now and March. So we felt that, you know, they were worth including versus some of the others that were, you know, still a little bit more in discussion.
Rep Garofano.
Yeah, and at the risk of making this even busier. I just found myself kind of toggling back to the GA housing report to see in that region how many rooms are being utilized. So maybe having that number on here would help to kind of show the gap of, kind of to your point, if there's, you know, 400 rooms being used
Mhm.
and we only have, you know, 20 shelter beds
Mhm.
or spaces,
Mhm.
that would help in one place
Mhm.
answer that.
Mhm.
Thank you.
Yeah, so I think my question follows pretty much, and this is looking, I couldn't
Do
see.
you want me to share it
Well,
again?
no, it's fine.
Okay.
Just that, for instance, green, there are some counties that have no green and there are
Mhm.
counties that have 36. So
Mhm.
it gives me the impression that we're not necessarily addressing a particular problem, across the state, but what's available to be housed in a certain locale. So is that a fair way to read that?
Yeah, I think we definitely have areas, and right, you can look at the math. We look at both the GA data. I think it's also helpful to just look at population allocation across counties, because sometimes you see higher numbers just where there are resources.
That's
In some communities, there are
Yeah.
very few hotels that will work with GA, and therefore those folks, if they're accessing the benefit, are going somewhere else. So yes, we absolutely look at kind of multiple data points by region when we're making funding decisions. I think in terms of shelter development in particular, there are communities where there has been a lot of support for shelter development, and I think there have been communities where it's been really challenging. And so I think some of those dynamics are at play
So it just
too, and
definitely
sometimes.
excuse me for interrupting,
Oh, no.
but this should definitely not be read as an indication of what the need is, that it's
No,
more
not
what's
at all.
available or what the programs that are currently available to.
Yes, that's correct.
Yeah, okay,
Yeah.
all right.
So one of the things that and I would encourage people to go on to the DCF website and, put in HOP in the search engine, and there's a lot of information there, and things like measurements, what outcome measures. And that's the thing that I've been kind of struck with in sort of looking at the data, that doesn't feel like it comports to, when we were just talking about, and what I'm sure that we're going to hear from shelter providers themselves, that, the length of stay, for instance, being, I think last year we were hearing that it took a year or more for people to move through a shelter. But, then I look at some of the data points on this in terms of the length of time homeless and the, successful placements and retention and total people homeless. These numbers don't seem to match what we see. And I realize these are coming from the continuum of care. And what I'm looking at right now is only the balance of state. Doesn't include the Chittenden County. So there's, another piece of data, which would be wonderful. Somehow they were just combined, so we didn't have to look at two different things. I don't really have a question here, I guess. I'm just trying to figure out how all of these pieces of data come together to tell us the true picture. And I'm, even though we've spent, years on this now here in this building, I'm having a hard time really understanding the true picture of all of the different components. And, I know there's been some, and this will actually kind of probably bleed over into Miranda's stuff, but, not necessarily requirements of people in the GA for registering in the continuum of care. And it just, like, when I think about a system, and I know I said this during the task force early on, it doesn't feel like a system. It feels like a lot of disparate pieces. And not that people aren't doing good work and they're doing their best to assist people, but it doesn't feel like a system. So if we were designing this from, the ground up, is this what we would do? And I realize, we have to deal with, sort of historical perspective, but as we're looking at a limited amount of resources, is this where we would put our resources, where they're going right now? It feels like we have a lot of people doing the same things. And maybe that's necessary. Not sure if I don't know, for instance, like how much of the case management services through the continuum of care, monies, and how that's being supplemented in some cases with HOP funds, and how that all fits into a need for each and every person or each and every household who is homeless to have access to that type of support in order to move from homelessness into permanent housing. And I'm just still, I guess, struggling to put the pieces together even after all this time. Yeah.
Go ahead, Representative.
Go ahead.
Thank you, sorry. Just a few things regarding the data regarding and I'm not sure if this is what you were looking at or not, but so in our annual report, we do have performance data, including the average length of stay for a shelter night, which has gone up, but it is significantly lower than sort of an individual person's average length of time experiencing homelessness. And again, we're looking sort of programmatically, so you could have, maybe, so for instance, in central Vermont, somebody goes to the seasonal shelter in Montpelier through Good Samaritan Haven. They stay for a few weeks, that's 14 days. Maybe they leave, they're in their car for a little bit, like something else happens. Then they come back and they go to their welcome center space. Like that starts a new period of time. So then you're comparing 14 days in that average with people who may also be in a shelter for a year, And so then again, similarly, if you had someone, maybe they're in shelter in John Graham and Virgins, they're there for a week. Maybe they get a job in downtown Middlebury and they're then able to get into shelter at Charterhouse. Like those are going to be two different stays because again, we're looking programmatically. And then when you include just some of the seasonal shelters or other shorter nights, that can impact the average. In terms of case management funding, we do fund positions that provide case management services. And then I think where it does become tricky is because that's limited, right? And those caseloads are limited. I think we fund about 65 positions through HOP that are doing a range of like housing navigation and retention services. And so then each local continuum of care is also trying to leverage other providers to help supplement those services. And so if you're, working on a council on aging or your reach up, how can we dip into those folks as well? Because we do have limited resources who are just 100% focused on housing, and happy to follow up with some of the breakdown of those FTEs if that would be helpful for you. So you
Yeah.
can see.
And it would actually, and I haven't had a chance to kind of look completely through the 2024 annual report.
Mhm.
So, maybe some of my questions are answered
Yeah.
there as well. And I think that it's, while, you were showing the big graph that showed the increase in expenses and financial support from the legislature, I think it's also important for people to realize that there's a considerable amount of federal money that comes into the state supporting people who are homeless as well. And that's not really captured there. And I'm not sure exactly how that is captured.
That funding has been, I would say, more stable over the years. We get an emergency solutions grant from HUD, Housing and Urban Development, which has grown only, equivalent to like a cost of living increase.
Yeah.
And then we do competitively participate for continuum of care funding, which has gone up, but that's also minimal compared to what we get for general fund. But we could look at that slide and do maybe a general fund, federal.
Federal fund, that would,
Yes.
yeah, that would be great. Thank you.
And then also one more point, and then sorry, Representative Garofano. I think we have also internally talked about, do we need to update our performance measures? Because so many of our performance measures are based on the availability of housing for people to get into. And so it just feels really that they are somewhat not up to date with where we are right now in terms of our housing, the shortage of housing in Vermont, and what maybe are more meaningful timelines or more meaningful measures. And that is something that has been on the list of our team, because we have been feeling like we're reporting on measures that made sense 5-6 years ago.
Right.
So again, it's on our list.
Well, it seems, there seems to be a disconnect in the administration's approach on housing and the approach on homelessness and supports for people who are homeless. So, I mean, so much the Commissioner of Housing and Community Development wondered like why he should come talk to us. And I'm like, well, if we don't have sufficient number of housing being developed for people of very low income, and some specialty housing, some different kinds of service supported housing. And if we're not really focusing on that, then how are we ever going to change the dynamic of people not having access to permanent housing? So it's not going to happen by osmosis, and it's not just build more and they will come and we'll take care of it. So I'm a little befuddled by that, but. Representative Garofano?
Thank you. So a little bit following up what Madam Chair was saying, as far as kind of the lack of kind of systemic approach. So as you both know, I have a history working for the Department OEO and supported the Family Supportive Housing Program. So I wonder, and I would be curious to find out, how many people could we serve if we took that approach for this population? Because that approach does guarantee a caseworker for a very manageable group of caseloads. And although it does, from my memory, it's been a while, but from my memory, it does leverage some of the other caseworkers in the community or other departments. But that caseworker is really assigned to an family supportive housing to the family. So, if we had maybe slightly higher, instead of at the time when I was there was 12 to 15, maybe it's 20 per caseworker. So there is that. So I'd just be curious what prevents us from looking at that approach for the broader population, and why haven't we done that, since I'm guessing that family supportive housing, it's still has pretty decent outcomes for families, and has been successful as it's expanded, because it has been successful.
Yeah, thank you so much for the question. And we do really, we really value our family supportive housing program, and we are very grateful that that now is a statewide program in every community. We could look at those numbers again to see for families what is the kind of caseload gap between where we are now versus where we would be if we were using that for every family. And so I could follow up with you, because we are able to identify, how many folks with minor children
And
have
just to
gone through the
clarify, I'm
assessment.
saying not for families, for everyone in this
Yes.
population. So why don't we use that approach for everyone who's experiencing homelessness, and see how many people can we serve by using that approach?
So I think we could do the analysis to say what would we need to grow for family services, family supportive housing for that population? We have launched the permanent supportive housing assistance Medicaid benefit, which is for folks who, right now we're looking at folks who have identified a disability and meet sort of the chronic definition of homelessness. So these are higher folks with maybe more complex needs. And so we're starting right now with 100 participants. That is another data point I could get you of, how many people are on those statewide lists. I think for families and folks with more complex needs, those two programs really have the benefit of a higher touch, more devoted service coordinator, as you said, lower caseload. And then I think you could look at others, and maybe a model where, you have a higher caseload, and what would that be? And we could kind of compare that with sort of our general housing navigation capacity. I think, as folks have said, and various witnesses have said, the population is a diverse population. Some folks really just need an affordable apartment, and they don't need, a high level of intensity, and they're just sort of waiting for that match, but others do, right? And so happy to kind of get you some of those numbers.
My point is, I could be wrong about this, but in my mind, that would help systematize this program that's very disparate right now across the state for the larger population. So right now you have certain number of FTEs within the department that help with casework and navigation. Then you leverage, various community organizations who all have different standards, different ways of doing things. And I think that's where we run into not having consistent data, no consistent way of going about the services that people are getting, and no consistent service delivery across the state. It depends who has the resources, which communities have. So in my mind, that's where we need to be driving towards, is to have some consistent method of helping folks exit the shelters, but that is developed within the department, not relying so much, and not to the community organizations are doing amazing work, but they have such a hard time finding funding and staffing and all that. Whereas the department has a lot more resources or at least infrastructure at your disposal to help systematize this. So we have standards and we're equitable in the service delivery across the state.
Yeah, and I think we have a lot of those in place. I think, again, when we're funding about 60, 65 positions statewide to do some of this housing case management in some communities, because again, we look regionally based on things like population, GA utilization to make our decisions every year when we look at our applications. So in some communities, they may only be getting 3 positions funded by, under the Housing Opportunity Grant Program. And so, you have one person out sick for a week, that just has a significant impact. And so I think, part of it is about the numbers, but we definitely, through our work and then the work of the Balance of State and the Chittenden County Homeless Alliance, there are expectations around, referral timelines for coordinated entry assessment and those things. And I think sometimes it can be about, right, do you have the folks to do that work? I'm happy to follow up with some numbers for you and some FTE, full-time equivalent information. Thank you for that question.
Okay, I think we should move to Miranda. And I don't know if are you going to share screen or should I just direct people to a spot? Okay. Thank you. And for committee members, I am shooting you off a link to HOP's most recent annual report where there's a lot of information and background for you to look at. Yeah,
Discrete question. So this is kind of really discrete, but I was skimming through the emergency shelter standards section. Why is it that HOP funds are not allowed to be used for the lead abatement requirements being met, the maintenance and painting?
Oh, so that's really a matter of just like the limited funds that we have and the focus on really services and staff and services. And, unfortunately, if we were to address sort of every structural or maintenance issue that these buildings have.
There is an avenue of financial assistance for shelters through the HFA,
If your document
Yes.
rather than just saying, no money. Okay, thanks.
Sure, yeah, and we do walk through, we have a habitability inspection once a year and we have a great team member who does that and walks through with each agency, all of their options and resources and we get a plan for each agency that we follow through with them to get them back on track. Thank you.
Well, good afternoon. So we're almost there. Miranda Gray, Deputy Commissioner for the Economic Services Division. And as would mention, I'm going to go over the last report. And so this is data that is a few weeks old at this point. And I will just point out that we do have the website that we update every Tuesday that would have the latest and greatest numbers. It's similar. So at the time of this report, we had 1,388 households that were participating in the program. It's 1,392 as of Monday. A number of people who were a part of the point in time count, 3,458, and then the number of individuals who have completed assessments for coordinated entry. And that is a component of engaging in the general assistance program, is that you have to go through coordinated entry.
Do we know when the results for the 2025 point in time survey will be ready?
Almost like a year. I feel like we just got this one.
Usually like,
Yeah, that's what I was just wondering.
We'll
Is
get it like next late fall,
Right,
winter.
yeah.
Initial.
I was gonna say, I feel like we got
Yeah.
initial numbers.
The Chittenden, the two local alliances usually do a report in the spring once they go through the data, and then every December is the report to Congress, which is sort of more of the like official, but I don't know if there will be delays given some of the recent data directives from the federal government as data standards or being given new guidance on data standards. So that may delay even the initial preliminary point in time results this year.
This next slide shows you where we're using rooms and how many households. You will see sometimes those numbers are different, and that is because if we have a larger household, that household might use more than one room. We also suppress any data that is smaller than 12, and often that also means we're suppressing some other part of the report, so that way we still aren't sharing the information just because Vermont is so small and it can identify folks. And I think to the representative's point about do we know where people are? What I can say is we do know that there are certain areas of the state where we have more access to hotels. And so it doesn't necessarily give you where people would prefer to be. We have tried, it's a little bit tricky for us to really understand where people would like to be. But ultimately, if we're building things out, that's what we would want to do, is keep kids close to their schools, keep people connected to their communities. But this is a part of what we do look at. Then we also track, as a part of this, what are the categories of folks that we are serving. I will note here as well that people can be in more than one category, and so that can also be challenging because we can, for instance, have someone who is disabled that is also a family. And what we try to do is to allow people to present in the easiest fashion to make them eligible. And so I think this is just acknowledging that there is some deficit to our data that we are trying to figure out, because to truly understand how everyone might, what they share with us might be eligible is something that we are trying to understand more.
So I see you have two disability categories there, those that qualify based on the sort of standard SSI, SSDI, and then those that are qualifying based upon the variance form. I'm just wondering why we separate that out.
Yeah, I think we do that just so that we can see the 2-1 GVR was something that is the medical form that you're referencing, was introduced during the last Budget Adjustment Act. So this is fairly new for us to understand, because this was expanding the program, which I think, and I think it has expanded it in a way that I don't know that everyone would know that they had, right? We have some cases where we have people who are going through serious treatments, cancer treatment, for example, but we also have real life examples, dry eyes, ingrown toenail, et cetera, that we are not medical professionals. And we've had a medical professional who has attested to the fact that someone has this diagnosis and wants shelter. And so we think it's important just to be able to give this information to folks to make sure, yes, if this was our intent, that is fine. But what we know is every time we grow the program, we don't have the space. And so ultimately, we are still having people that aren't going to have access to shelter.
Well, I guess I just want to be clear also, we reinstated something that was available during the pandemic. There was a disability variance form during the pandemic that was utilized, and then it was discontinued, and then a newer version of that.
And many iterations of
Yes.
this new program.
Yes, yeah, many versions. That's very true. And so I guess since you just sort of called out two examples, are you saying that we have those are examples, are those the frequent examples of things like that I'm not sure we would consider dry eye, being something that would be a medical condition requiring that kind, I mean, we all want shelter, but I'm just thinking about that qualifies an individual under that provision.
And I think the provision is, it isn't as, right now, the department believes that if someone has this form completed by a professional, that we need to offer them housing. And so I think it's just for us to gather this information to share. I would say the list is very long. I mean, pages worth of different diagnoses. The top diagnosis would be substance use. And then I think with depression and anxiety. So we have kind of like what are the more common, and then we have, a large number of diagnoses that I don't know if that was the intent or not, because it was just this form is an available tool for people to be able to get shelter. So I think that's why it's important, just because as you can see, it is one of the largest conditions that we are.
And do you provide any training or guidance to medical professionals on the use of the form?
We did do initially some outreach to educate and say that this was going to be a form that they could anticipate seeing, and did have to navigate through some different practices, what that meant to complete the form. But I don't know. I honestly, I don't know how I would know what to educate them on. Like, yes, this is something that you can complete, or not being a medical professional myself. I don't know. Maybe someone does need shelter because they have dry eyes. But for me, it is a decision of dry eyes, or I have a mom who has a newborn that are being discharged from the hospital, and we have one room. So I think it's just to be informational.
So just to clarify, thank you, Madam Chair, no analysis of that, the forms has been performed by the department. And so what you're sharing is anecdotal based on experience of seeing these.
So we are tracking every diagnosis, and I will say that we have some folks who have multiple, right? But in terms of, do we have a medical professional? No, Economic Services doesn't have one on our team, but this is information that we're gathering so that we can share, and perhaps, yes, I could look to my counterparts in the health department to say who needs this and who doesn't, but it is tricky.
Representative McGill.
Yes. Yeah, I just have a problem with the way this is being framed, perpetuating stigma a lot, I think. So I'll just ask for this mom with dry eyes or person with a hangnail, was that the only kind of condition listed? Okay. And then, so there is, I just want to point people to the form, that a health professional has to describe the disability or health condition, and then go on and provide a narrative on the risk posed to the individual about this. So it's not just, oh, they've got dry eye, and then they have to, provide a narrative about the specialized program and services they need because of this condition. So I just want to highlight that it's a lot more in depth than just listing off any old medical condition that's being provided. So putting that out.
Thank you. And I think there is some variance to the form in what medical providers are supplying to us. Sorry, wrong way. I don't know if you would like me to go into this too much, but I will say that because of a part of the law that had room caps in place, the 1,100, we did look at, we need to be able to get to that number. We were well over that number when September 15th happened. We put an administrative procedure into place. It is something that we continue to use because we are at capacity in this winter, and we are having those conversations in LCAR. Continue to have those conversations about the department's use of having an administrative procedure.
Representative Steady.
You currently have people that are waiting to use their 80 days but can't get access to a room?
Yes.
Well, there's no 80 days right now.
There are people who have not used any of their days who are not able to access the GA program right now.
Yeah.
Yes.
I just want to be clear, we're in winter weather provisions, so the 80 days are not a factor at this point in time. But we have people who
are eligible. You have people, I have to ask a question. So do you currently have people that are eligible that can't get a room?
Yes, thank you.
Representative Cole?
Yeah, I think I don't want to lose sight of like the importance of the comment about the dries and the King and that and all, and about how the whole narrative needs to be considered. So I'm wondering if it would be helpful for the committee and for the better understanding of the numbers up there and how it's broken down. I don't know if it's possible, but like to have a way to make those forms, like an example or two of those forms anonymous, like so non-identifying, that the committee could take a look at and really get a better understanding of sort of the bigger picture, like, you know what I'm,
A sampling. I can
Yeah.
ask our legal team to see.
Okay.
I don't know if we can.
But I was gonna ask for, because again, a sampling doesn't give us a big picture ideas. You said you're keeping kind of lists and data and the types of things. Can you get us that? Like, what are the, how many are, the
By
trends you see?
diagnosis.
Yeah. And numbers of those diagnoses would be really helpful.
Thank you.
Um,
I'm sorry, can you continue back up onto the eligible?
Mhm.
So I'm trying to understand because I've heard different testimony on sort of that length of authorization. And I'm trying to, and I think I've heard you say before, Miranda, that, we've done very short authorizations, in trial periods with hotels or whatever. So, so I guess I'm just trying to equate that with what I see up on the screen, this talking about 28-day increments and how often people have to reauthorize, and are the things that we've heard in testimony, I guess, more of what I would call exceptions, or are they part of sort of like the regular process that staff use in authorizing stays?
So there is a range, and it truly depends on the establishment and then the individual we're trying to house. So if it's someone that's brand new and there is no history there, the establishment might say, we'll do 2 days, or they might say, let's do 14, and we're going to see how does this work for both of us. And then there are others who have stayed, and it seems to be working for everybody. And in this case, they could have up to 28 days if they meet one of the higher risk household numbers. And then we also have, for those that aren't a part of the high risk household, we have said we will do grants up to 14 days. But that's kind of the longest for that group. And what I say is where it becomes very individualized is, do people have income? Because law says that there are income contributions. And so those folks have a certain number of days that they have to pay for. And then we would do an authorization to about where they stop paying and the state starts paying. So this is where it is truly a range. And then there's a lot of variables based upon locations.
So I guess it's just to be more accurate to say that, that there's a range of authorizations that are provided based on individual circumstances, and the maximum is 28 days. Is that?
Yeah, I mean, I'm happy to, it is.
I'm just trying to have people have an accurate picture of what currently exists as we look to what the future might be, that's all.
I'd say anywhere from, it could be a day, 2 days, up to 28 days would be the max.
Thank you.
These are other data points about how many households that we have served since is over 3,600. The number of households that had reached 80 days prior to coming into the cold weather period. So that's just over 1,000. And the number of households that have reached and are housed. So we have just over 450 households who are currently in a hotel room that have already used their 80 days, not counting any time that's because as the chair had mentioned, we don't count this cold weather time in their 80 days. So these are folks that who used it prior to December 1st.
Did you, I don't see it in this version of the report. I saw a previous version. I'm thinking about this 1,100 day cap that showed what the utilization was after September 15th. And as you said, you had to sort of ramp down on September 15th. But then it seemed like there were a period of many weeks where you never hit the 1100.
Yeah, the administrative procedure was only in place for, I want to say, 2 or 3 days. And so it was, we had a fair amount of households who September 19th was when 80 days would happen. And so we saw a steady decline from that point on, but it really did range in it. Some of the factors in there are how many days do people have to pay for themselves? So we have some folks who maybe pay for 3 days a month, but we have upwards of some people who are paying for over a dozen days. And so that's all based on what kind of income that they might have. So yeah, we don't have that here still just because it isn't something that's applicable in the moment.
Right now, yeah, okay. The reason I bring it up is because the commissioner was talking about earlier that the budget that's been submitted is essentially a replay of what is in the FY25 budget. I guess what I'm trying to think about in my head about the 1100 was a negotiated room cap. And if we're thinking about, we know that there is only a certain capacity, and in the winter, we kind of reach that capacity between 13 and 1400 rooms, it seems. So it's not that far off from the sort of non-winter. It's just like 200 to 300 rooms. So, okay, thank you. I'm just sort of talking out loud.
And I think the rest I've already mentioned about getting into coordinated entry, and then I believe the rest of the slides are really about coordinated entry and then sheltering, which you already got to hear from Lillian. So happy to take any other questions that folks might have.
Rep. Donahue.
Just, I think the last, because I had looked ahead a little, the last screen is a helpful context, the residential capacity. Oh, not yet. Residential capacity, what?
That's
Page very last.
Okay.
There we go. Yeah, I mean, I think that's a useful reminder in terms of conversations we've had before about we end up with the highest level emergency and so forth because we don't invest in community programs. And because of my own, background knowledge, I look at the first one. And the amount of money we've been spending on building more inpatient mental health beds and highest level of care beds, when we know that group homes, residential beds are at capacity, have been at capacity around the state for years and years and years. And the reason that the reason that inpatient is needed is not because there's a huge influx of more patients needing care. It's because of length of stay, because they can't be discharged and so on. And we see that in I'm talking about mental health, but we see that in virtually every one of our systems of care. People are stuck at the highest cost, highest level of care because we don't have the investments in the lower levels of care. And similarly with people stuck in hotel rooms who, we don't have the opportunities for. Although I do see that the skilled nursing facility, I would certainly raises one question. That's data that says how many are currently available. I don't know if that means available staffed and as opposed to vacancies, but they're understaffed and can't actually admit patients. So.
But I think staffing is a component.
Yeah, right. But those aren't actually available in terms of being staffed.
Any other questions? Okay, thank you for helping us to sort of continue to fill in the picture about what the state is currently doing, and how we might be able to continue to improve upon that. So thank you both being here, and I look forward to ongoing continued discussions over the next few weeks as we try to figure this out. Yes,
we're not running off to lunch.
No, we are breaking it.
We have a meeting.
Oh, we have one more.
Oh, wait a minute. Who did I miss? Oh, I'm sorry. You're not. You're not. Yeah, we have creative economy.
Witness.
We need to leave.
Yeah, they have another appointment.
Yeah.
Thank you. Okay, my apologies. So taken up in the GA emergency housing that I completely neglected the creative economy. You know,
Still on.
Thank you.
Oh, yeah, sorry, I don't want it in your way.
I'm gonna mute us.
okay, welcome.
Hi,
My apologies.
that's quite all right.
Who's Lydia and who's Amy?
I'm Lydia.
Okay, all righty. Welcome to House Human Services and the floor is yours. Thank you for waiting.
No problem. Thank you for having us. We realize we're between you and lunch, so we'll keep it quick. My name is Amy Cunningham. I'm the Deputy Director of the Vermont Arts Council, and I'm really pleased to have this opportunity to give you, and honored to share the table with Lydia, to give you an example of the ways that arts can play a really important role in the health and well-being of all Vermonters. We're here today as part of the Vermont Creative Network.
Sorry.
Creative Sector Day. Vermont's creative sector, that's all the businesses, nonprofits, and individuals whose work is rooted in creativity. It's a significant driver of our state's economy. It was nearly $1.2 billion industry in Vermont in 2022. And our work strengthens communities, brings people together, contributes to health and wellness, and builds our economy. We're in the card room today. Invite you to stop by. There's really cool puzzles that the folks from Generator made of Vermont. Please pick one of those up. We're hosting a reception in Cedar Creek Room at 3:00 with Circus Smirkus. So you don't want to miss that. So, right? I mean, we've got to take part in that. And so I am really pleased to turn it over to Lydia from the Howard Center Arts Collective.
Thank you. Yes, hello. Good afternoon. It's an honor to be inside the building. I have been outside on the front lawn for different reasons, but it's nice to be inside. I understand, as Amy mentioned, that it is this, and then I imagine lunch. So I will not mention food, and I will try to stay strictly within the time limits that I am given. I am going to screen share, hopefully successfully here. Is this visible? Good at making art. I'm not great at technology. So bear with me. And I'm going to read what I have here to help stay within that time limit. So let's see. Here we are. My name is Lydia Litwin. I'm the studio manager here on behalf of the Howard Center Arts Collective. And I work alongside Kara Greenblatt, who's the coordinator and has been pivotal to the development and growth of the collective. So the Arts Collective is an alternative arts program at the Howard Center. As the name suggests, we're a cooperative group who enjoy making art together. But we didn't all journey here to Montpelier to discuss which pastels are the most vibrant. The art making is the act, but we can if you want to after. So the art making is the act, but what it does for the participants is so much more. And that's what I want to tell you about. So first, let me briefly define art. In the Arts Collective, it includes coloring books, scribbling, splattering, copying, crumpling up. It's making a mess, smudging, smearing, splattering.
Can we hold just a moment?
Yeah.
I'd like to have you heard a little better than you currently are. I'm gonna ask folks in the hallway to be-
Absolutely. I have a teacher voice. I'm happy to yell, but I'm sure you don't want me yelling this at you.
It's lunchtime, so other committees are getting
Yeah.
released.
Yeah.
think that's gonna be moderately successful. It's 3 feet that way.
Appreciate it, thank you.
Sure.
Okay. It's illustrating what is inside. So sometimes it's sad, sometimes gruesome, and sometimes humorous. It's childlike and playful. It's music, dancing, poetry, and sometimes it's simply sitting in the same room with other people. So whenever you hear me mention the word art, just know that it holds all of that. So what does all of this do? Well, it does a lot. As a part of the Howard Center, we view art making through the lens of mental health and challenges. It promotes wellness, self-esteem, and dignity in its participants by creating a safe and nurturing space for artists to make art, exchange ideas and learn, and form supportive connections with other artists, as well as exhibit their art in public spaces. We're made up of staff, clients, and people from outside of the organization who are interested in art. It is totally non-clinical, community-based program where everyone is on equal footing. And this is really important to the functioning of it. It's non-hierarchical between staff and clients. And in fact, we don't use the word clients. We just say artists. So I want to linger for a moment just on this notion of wellness and safety a bit longer. Now, more than ever, as I'm sure you're aware, there's a need for everyone to feel safe in who they are. We're fortunate to live here in this brave little state, but we're not exempt from the effects of broader national actions, as I'm sure you've been hearing all day. Every day, people are really turning to their communities for comfort. So before I narrate a bit of the history and the locations of the Arts Collective, I want to highlight the words, some of the words of some artists themselves, for their words will be the most poignant and powerful. So I'm going to begin with the short poem, which was written collaboratively by several artists in the collective, titled "Art is My Sanctuary." It grounds me and gives my life meaning. Art empowers and enriches me. It opens me up to other worlds. Art speaks my name. It remedies my trauma. It gives me purpose and allows me to express myself without judgment. Art is my Prozac. It heals me. It is my medicine. Art makes me vulnerable. It is my happy place. Art is a surprise. It gets me high. It lets me play. It's how I express my voice. Art is humanity. Art is the light in my day. I am an artist. So a little history. The Arts Collective began in 2013 when few members of residential staff were participating in a retreat. And they had the idea for a supportive group for both staff and clients to talk about their art and show it together. They put together their first show that year. It was a success. And then they began not only holding more shows, but meeting weekly. For 4 years, the Arts Collective was entirely volunteer with no budget. In 2017, Kara submitted a proposal to the Howard Center leadership, and they were given funding, which allowed the collective to have some part-time members, staff members, and expand what they did. From then on, the collective was able to host workshops, open studios, take field trips, and do more things that they're still doing today. And while the support from the Howard Center is critical, it's not enough for the collective to do everything. We rely heavily on funding that comes from Vermont Arts Council, which we thank greatly, the Vermont Community Foundation, and other anonymous and private donations. Right, so a week in the life of Arts Collective, what does it look like? What do? We have open studios twice a week. One is held at the Pathways Community Center and is open to anyone, and one that's held at the Westview House, which is available to Howard Center direct service clients only. Both are stocked with a variety of free-to-use supplies to anyone who comes in. We also hold community Zoom calls once a week on Thursdays at noon for an hour. This is a time for members to share their art and talk about it, to socialize with the community, and to help plan events and activities for the collective. This is a really important piece of the week, especially for those who cannot or do not want to be in person, as it still includes them in the sharing and viewing of artwork, but also in planning and decision-making, which supports that non-hierarchical quality within the collective. Who the Arts Collective is for. It's anyone over 18 years old who has life experience with mental health or substance use challenges, no matter your skill or experience level. The experience can be that of their own. It could be of friends or family members or through the work they do. Many who attend do have severe and chronic illness. This could mean bipolar disorder, schizoaffective disorder, clinical depression, obsessive compulsive disorder, and cognitive disabilities. Some hear voices, many experience hallucinations, and many go through long or short-term periods of psychosis, depression, or mania. And while some may discuss their experiences when they're together, there's absolutely no requirement to disclose a diagnosis in order to participate. You don't have to know a lot about art. You don't have to identify as an artist. If you're interested in trying something new or being creative, you're welcome to join. I'd like to tell you briefly about two artists that are currently showing their work in a featured artist exhibit. And I'm going to tell you about these two just because they exemplify the breadth of participants and life experiences that we see come through. So the first is a woman named Steph. She's married, she has 2 children, and works professionally as a scientist. But what isn't apparent when talking with Steph is that she has struggled with depression and suicidal ideation since before she was a teenager. On multiple occasions, she spent time in the hospital due to the intensity of these feelings. During her time in the hospital, art was a comfort and a way for her to explore what it was that was going on in her mind. The product of that, several pieces of art that are drawn on scrap papers, the backs of hospital menus, and coloring sheets are now displayed in the newly opened mental health urgent care. Others from that time, as well as her time at home and in our open studios, are hanging in the featured artist exhibit, which is pictured here. And this is in the Flynn Dog building at 208 Flynn Avenue in the South End. So the featured artist show is a chance for 2 individual artists to show a body of their work for 3 months at a time. The second is a man that I will call Justin. He came to Open Studio by way of the Pathways Community Center. He manages pretty severe Tourette's and was houseless for the year that we saw him. The couple hours making art each Friday quickly became regular for Justin. Other folks at the center supported his creativity, and he welcomed the opportunity to have some of his charcoal paintings framed and on display. The first day that I brought an envelope with cash in it to Justin and explained that some folks from out of town had traveled through and purchased 2 of his works off the wall, what will be forever ingrained in my memory. He was blown away in disbelief and so very validated. For Justin, this little wad of cash was invaluable. Many of our clients depend on disability checks and 3 Squares Vermont to help support even their basic needs. Our exhibitions then not only fortify their well-being and creativity, but also are a small chance extra at some income. From then on, Justin continued to show up, take suggestions, ask for guidance, and now has an entire wall of his art on display. Unfortunately, being houseless in Vermont winter was too difficult, and he made a long bus trip south just a couple weeks ago. In an email he sent to tell me of his departure, he wrote, "Thanks for everything. I've never had opportunities in art like you've given. It means the world to me." And even after writing this, another of his pieces has sold, so now I need to work to find a way to get that money to him several states away. So other places that we've had exhibitions, the Amy Tarrant Gallery, which is part of the Flynn Center for Performing Arts, the Flynn Dog building, which is pictured here at 208 Flynn Avenue. This was our art hop exhibit that had 73 pieces of art, I think, from 30 something artists in it. Oops, a little clip there. And the Fleming Museum, this is our current exhibit, and this is up for the entire academic year. We've had exhibits at the BCA Burlington City Arts external exhibitions at City Hall and the airport, and at the Space Gallery, Union Station in Burlington, and the Fletcher Free Library.
We got a state house.
Yeah.
Yeah.
We
Let's talk about it.
These walls are,
Yes.
look a little blank.
Yeah.
Well, there's something that's supposed to come there, I mean, you know, but, yeah, I mean, literally, the State House curator, is always looking, there's a, you know, feature space in the cafeteria, where a lot of people, hundreds and hundreds of people go through there every day, so.
That would be an honor.
Been working with David on getting some pieces placed in Senate GovOps so we could, yeah.
Yeah, that'd be great.
Be here all day. That would be great. So this is not, it's not great, no, not only a great opportunity to get art out into the public, but also to raise awareness to the public about what we do. We also take field trips when it's possible to see these exhibitions and others, as well as to see local speakers and performances, which is really a very big opportunity for some of the folks that join us. Here they are, a group viewing our current show in City Hall in Burlington. We also engage in public art projects such as these painted mailbox, which are still proudly on display on Flynn Avenue. And this community quilt, which is in the Fleming Museum right now as part of the Let the Fabric Speak. It's comprised of 484 CDs, which were all donated by the public and decorated by artists for several months and then wired together by staff and some very patient volunteers. So needless to say, we're busy. Amidst all of this, staff and participants also work on murals in Howard Center residences and sometimes public spaces, which is what's pictured here. It's a beautiful way to bring multiple realities together to create an idea and decorate the walls around them. So I will close with the words of another artist. This is a woman who regularly attends our Friday studios. She struggles with a history of trauma and anxiety and depends on public transportation to get anywhere. In our space, she has found a safe place to show her true colors. In our most recent short film about our exhibition at the Fleming Museum, which I believe was sent along to you all prior to today, she says, "Art challenges me and keeps me motivated. It gives me something to look forward to. It helps me express myself and to release the stress and anxiety that I carry with me. My life is rather isolated, and going there to studio, I feel like I am a part of something and I'm not alone anymore. It's like a family, and I'm comforted by that." After attending the opening reception for this exhibit, which is pictured here at the museum, this artist wrote me an email and described how it felt for her to be in that crowd, which would normally be a very nerve-wracking experience for her. "I felt like I was at a grand ball, like Cinderella, but in comfortable clothes. To be a part of something bigger, to actually blend in, belong. No one was better than me and no one was beneath me. It was just so new to me. You and Kara showed me a side of the world I never knew existed. I don't have to pretend. I didn't have anyone controlling me. I was not embarrassed of my appearance. I didn't have time to. I was too busy seeing the world around me. I found myself reaching out to others to make them feel as comfortable and happy as I was. It was just a fun change, a chance to see another world, or maybe it is the world as it should be." Yeah.
That's a pretty powerful statement. Huh?
Yeah. So how to be involved, you can just show up. Best way is to be added to our email list. We send out a few, not many, weekly information about our exhibits and our meetings and our studio times. You can refer somebody to us, and you can check out the Howard Center website. So thank you for staying this extra bit and the opportunity to share about the Arts Collective and our project, which demonstrates, I think, the powerful role that arts and culture play across many sectors and in all facets of Vermont life.
Thank you for, I'm just gonna say it was a very nice way to end the morning. And to, around us and what possibilities are.
I wish I had to do an art project with you all, but we'll do that.
You really want to test that, you don't have to have any artist background.
I guess.
Just want to say the creative aging grants are amazing. So, engaging with the older Vermonters at the senior centers around the state and the different places that they award them to.
We appreciate your
Good work.
guidance on that. And Troy Hickman, who you know was just testifying in House Healthcare earlier this morning about that project.
Great.
Good